Welcome to Freethought Matters. I'm Laurie Gaylor.
And I'm Dan Barker. We are co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces this weekly show. Don't miss our program today about an atheist chaplain who ministered to an atheist inmate on death row.
The Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces Freethought Matters, is the nation's largest association of free thinkers. That's atheists, agnostics, and other non-believers. We invite you to join us in our vital work to keep our secular government free from religious influence. Become a member at FFRF.org or ask for a complimentary copy of our newspaper, Freethought Today. Freedom depends on freethinkers. Watch prior episodes of Freethought Matters on FFRF's YouTube channel.
Our guest today, Devin Moss, is a Brooklyn-based humanist chaplain. He's a podcast host and a podcast producer, a screenwriter, and, as he puts it, a perpetual student. He has a podcast on spirituality and death called The Adventures of Memento Mori. You may have read about Devin in a major front-page story in the New York Times describing how, as a humanist chaplain, he came to support an atheist inmate on death row in Oklahoma.
Welcome to Freethought Matters, Devin Moss.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So this was quite a story. It made national news that you would be involved in such a thing. And how did you become involved? You're in Brooklyn and this person's in Oklahoma. So how did this story even happen?
Yeah, that's a good question. So about a year ago, Philip Hancock, the man that we are referring to, fired his then Christian chaplain and was looking for a non-theist chaplain. And so his attorneys reached out to the American Humanist Association, and they pinged me, and I said, yes, I would love to go on this experience. And I was just recently, I've only been a chaplain for a couple of years, so this was all very new to me. And so I was looking to cut my teeth, so to speak.
And so I think we want to clarify that when Philip Hancock, when he committed these crimes, killing two men, and he said in self-defense, he was a Christian believer. And it's a very unusual thing to hear about a jailhouse deconversion, but he lost his faith in jail. And the New York Times even quoted him saying it was a great weight off his shoulders. So did he talk to you about how he came to reevaluate his beliefs about religion in prison?
Quite extensively. I mean, so we had conversations over the span of almost a year, and so that topic was talked about frequently. He grew up with doubts of faith. He grew up in an abusive household. He says that the first time he actually remembers doubting his Christian upbringing was when he was 6 years old, and there was a crucifix in his house, and he remembers staring at it and questioning the benevolence of, what he was taught that Jesus espoused. And so it was throughout his life, he always wrestled with this. And I would say that it sort of like came and went. But at the time that these killings happened, especially in that moment, he was a man of faith.
And so he went through a whole process of reading, or did he explain why he came to doubt religion?
I mean, if you just look at his life circumstance and the trials that he had to endure, one can see quite easily why someone would lose faith. I will say this: Phil didn't always make the best decisions, but man, was he dealt a set of cards that would make anybody doubt their faith in God.
So you conducted a lot of it by phone, and wasn't there some worry about your phone conversations being recorded and used against him?
Because he was going to seek clemency from Governor Stitz, who had said he wanted to claim the state of Oklahoma for Jesus Christ.
It happened to another man that was executed. His clemency was actually denied because of conversations with the previous chaplain. That previous chaplain had published those recordings prior, and so the advice from the attorneys was, talk what you need to talk about. Just make sure that, that any recordings don't get out. As it came to pass, I found out the morning of the execution that the governor had listened to some recordings.
Wow.
And I don't know if it was with me. That information I don't have access to, but there was some recordings. And listen, Phil knew that they were potentially listening. And so oftentimes during our conversation, he would break contact with me and address sort of this mystery big brother who he just assumed was listening. And so he would say, we would be talking about something and it'd be like, yeah, and, Governor Stitt, if you're listening, ... And he would so he was aware. I just want to make sure that was clear. And this brings up a point that I do want to very passionately put in there, is that the conversations with the attorneys are privileged conversations. The conversations with the therapists are privileged conversations. However, in the state of Oklahoma, conversations with the spiritual advisors are not privileged conversations. And so if, as a self-proclaimed Christian state, I am utterly befuddled that they would not protect the religious rights in the same way that they protect the legal rights.
But I take it then that you had candid conversations with Philip about his non-belief over the phone.
Oh, absolutely. Constantly. I mean, that was the
point.
That was the point. And, we talked about his case quite a bit. At the beginning of our relationship, I would try to govern or regulate where the conversations went, but then that is also not my job as spiritual advisors to be gatekeeper, right? And so we talked about any and all, and I did not try to sort of hit the pause button on some things that he wanted to talk about.
So God wasn't listening, but the governor was, apparently.
Yeah.
So eventually you moved from telephone. You actually moved to Oklahoma, is that right?
Yeah, in October, I actually went to Oklahoma just to be closer for a multitude of reasons. One, to be there leading up to the clemency hearing, which happens 21 days prior to the scheduled execution. So I wanted to be around there. And then I had gotten to know other activists and political figures that I just wanted to be closer to, in addition to being able to go see Phil every Friday in person. So
that was quite a commitment, because you were working completely as a volunteer.
Correct. It was an unpaid job. The standard practice for spiritual care chaplain for a man on death row is really just during the death watch period, which is 7 days prior to the execution. And I don't see how anybody could really wrestle with the hard questions about being killed in 7 days. So I just felt it was important that, to hold up our relationship and be there for Phil for as long as I possibly could.
So you were in the room then at the end there. Now, when I picture an execution, I picture some scary electric chair kind of thing, but was it like that? I think I read that he just basically was put to sleep.
Yeah, it is lethal injection. There is a 3-phased process. It happens fairly quickly. It wasn't, it's a very sterile environment. It's such a weird thing to talk about, to sort of like credit the Department of Corrections for being professional, but there were in that time of the execution itself. Again, it's a weird thing to say because they were executing a human. That was the most care that they showed him, was in those brief moments. There were many opportunities prior to that moment, like that week on Death Watch, where they did not provide him with many moments of humanity and dignity. But in that moment, in that space, he's strapped to a gurney that's shaped like a cross, and so the first is a sedative, and then he goes to sleep, and then the other two chemicals are injected.
Well, it's very barbaric, but I'm glad it wasn't as botched as we read about so many executions today. But I think we have time just for one more question before we go for a break, and that is the indignity of the last meal. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, this is one that really hurts and bothers me. So he wanted his last meal to be a large bucket of dark meat, original recipe Kentucky Fried Chicken. And the way it works, at least in Oklahoma, is that you have a $25 budget and essentially a 5-mile radius for whatever you want your last meal to be. And he was looking forward to his bucket of chicken. Talked about it quite frequently, the leading up to it. And I saw him like an hour before he was supposed to get it, and that's all he talked about. And then instead, one, they delivered it late, and two, instead of a large bucket of dark meat, original recipe bucket of chicken, they gave him a 10-piece chicken strip. And that may not sound like a huge miss, but like you have one job, and it's just heartbreaking.
It also shows the privation of being in prison and knowing you're about to be killed and being promised something on your own terms, and then, being denied it. Dehumanizing.
Just one more thing about that, and I don't, I do have respect for people that go into the corrections profession, but I will say I was left oftentimes wondering if it's just people doing the bare minimum, if it's just incompetence, or if there is actually malintent. And I don't even to this day know which is true, if not all of the above.
Well, maybe there's just a general disrespect for anyone who's in prison. Why give them any dignity at all?
So, Devin, this must have been very hard for you, being there through all the ups and downs and being the support system. What was that like? I'm learning on the job as well. I think up until the execution itself, I had great insecurity about what is spiritual care. Oftentimes he would drive the conversations. I was insecure if I was really even helping him, So I think with him, we had I wouldn't say we had an up and down relationship, but it was definitely full of doubt and WTFs and what am I doing here? But you must have been a great moral support for him. He must have expressed that. Yes, he did. And I got to know his mother, and that was a big part of the support. And I will say just the importance of all of that work, right? So all of that 10 months of like figuring each other out and what are we talking about, and we listening to him vent. I've heard the same story 300 times, right? Because he talks a lot about his case and trying to, at certain points, I have a life too. And when my plumbing goes out, it's like, Phil, come on, I can't hear this one more time. And so you have to balance, I'm human too. And so you have to balance this relationship. And so could I have created stronger boundaries? Yes, but I intentionally sort of kept them wide and open. But all of that work for that 10 months built to what essentially was 10 minutes in the execution chamber. And in that moment, spiritual care for a non-theist made absolute 100% sense to me and to him.
We are talking with atheist chaplain Devin Moss about attending the execution of an atheist prisoner. And when we come back, Devin, after the break, we want to ask you about your own journey, if you were raised religious and how you came out of that as well. We'll be right back after this.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist. When I first recorded that commercial back in 2014, being openly atheist in America was still fairly uncommon. Today, the fastest growing religious group in the country is the non-religious, especially among the young. That progress is heartening, but the religious pushback is fierce and the forces of Christian nationalism are well organized. Our progress won't continue unless we work together so that reason and our secular constitution will prevail. That's why I'm asking you to join the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics working to keep state and church separate, just like our founders intended. Please join the Freedom from Religion Foundation today. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
I believe in an America where the separation of church and state is absolute, where no religious body seeks to impose its will, directly or indirectly, upon the general populace.
Let's restore respect for America's secular roots. Help the Freedom from Religion Foundation defend the wall of separation between state and church. Join us at FFRF.org. Freedom depends on freethinkers.
My name's Jarvis, and I'm an out-of-the-closet atheist. There are many reasons why I'm an atheist, but I'll start with the crudest explanation. I'm sure many of you have seen Clash of the Titans or The Immortals or 300, these blockbuster films about ancient Greek or Roman religion, which we now call mythology. But back then it wasn't mythology. It was very real for them. They genuinely believed that you had to put a coin in a person's mouth before they were buried so that they could pay for the literal ferry to the afterlife. Just as many people today believe that they should eat crackers and wine on a Sunday, or that God wants women to hide their bodies under black burqas. Every religion that has ever existed, and there are many, have all believed that they were right, that their rituals and rules and beliefs were 100% correct, and they all thought they nailed it. But where are they today? If they're not completely forgotten, they're on the silver screen, amusing us with their sword fights, animal sacrifices, and oracles. The religions of today are the entertainment of tomorrow. Everyone, I hope, is an atheist about Zeus and Apollo, Juno and Poseidon. I just added Jesus and Muhammad to that list.
Welcome back to Freethought Matters. We're continuing our conversation with Devin Moss, who is an atheist chaplain, a humanist chaplain who was attending and ministering to an inmate on death row in Oklahoma. So Devin, the inmate, Philip Hancock, was raised religious, but I understand you were also raised religious. Is that true?
Yeah, true. I was raised Assemblies of God. I actually went to a private church school growing up until the 4th grade. If you ever watched the documentary Jesus Camp, that was
you.
That was a reflection of how I was raised. I think I even had the same haircut.
Pentecostal.
Yeah. And then, like Phil in some ways, our lives did not parallel, but I think our doubt paralleled it in some ways. I always kind of wondered and didn't believe the rapture was a big thing in the 80s when I was a kid, and I didn't particularly want to be sucked up into the sky. And we watched these very scary movies with people getting 666 tattoos on their head, and it wasn't fun, right? And you'd walk outside and you would see a big hole in a cloud, and you're like, oh my goodness, is that the cloud that's going to suck us up? And so that was childhood. And so I just always kind of wrestled with it. My parents are really good people, and they have great values. And so I don't resent them for making these choices. I wasn't harmed in any way necessarily by being raised this way, but it didn't fit for me. But I always searched for something. And then I was Catholic for a hot minute, and then tried Southern Baptist for another hot minute. And none of those stuck. I was really into Buddhism and meditation and Buddhist philosophy, which is the most sort of the most resonant for me. So I've always kind of leaned Buddhist. And then I started a podcast on death. And then I was actually interviewing a Buddhist, and she said, a Zen master, and she was like, after the interview, she said to me, you know, you would make a good chaplain. Huh. And my first reaction was like, can't. I don't believe in God. And then she responded, well, neither do I. The question is what do you believe in? And so that really got me thinking about like, okay, so, you know, we live in the framework of a religious society, whether we like it or not, and we can argue historically what America was founded on, but we live in the water, we swim in the water of religion. And so I preferred not to define myself and beliefs by what I didn't believe in. And so I took that approach of being like, what do I believe in? And that's how I found humanism.
So what is a humanist chaplain, and how did you become one?
So a humanist chaplain, we still work within the interfaith community. So at a hospital or wherever, we are still part of the group. So it's not like humanist chaplains only work with people without faith. So we have to have a good understanding of, you know, of other religions. And so what that means and our job as spiritual care is just to help to understand how the patient or the inmate or whomever is contextualizing their pain through theology, mythology, or symbolism, and to be able to work with them in that regard, and to find out what's sacred to them. And so you can be a completely non-religious, anti-religious person, but still have sacred meaning and still see the world through symbolism. And so that's really what the job of spiritual care is. And so how I got there is curiosity. I reached out to Greg Epstein, who is the humanist chaplain, head of Harvard chaplaincy and also MIT. I reached out to the humanist chaplain at NYU and Columbia, and both of them guided me to seminary school. So I went to seminary school. And then after that, in my chaplain internship, worked at Bellevue Hospital here in New York City during the pandemic.
So some religious viewers of the show might wonder how a person who doesn't believe in an afterlife could calmly face death with no hope of living on. Do you address those questions?
Yeah. I mean, I wouldn't use the word calmly. I don't know if anybody, religious or otherwise, is calm, or calm should be the goal. But I think that transition is the most important moment in that person's life. It's the most scariest moment in that person's life. And so, maybe it's easier for people of faith that think they're going to reunite with their family on the other side. If that helps them in that transition, I'm not against that, and I can support that. But for those of us that don't, I think preparing for that moment doesn't happen 2 minutes before. It happens a lifetime before. It happens a month before. And so I think what's important is especially for spiritual care, is to help people as they journey into that transition, right? But Stephen Jenkinson, he's a death worker. He calls himself a death worker up in Canada, and he says that dying isn't what happens. Dying is what you do, right? So dying doesn't happen to you. It's what we all do. And so if we just sort of look at that and say, how can we do it better without the need for supernatural beliefs?
So I would like to address this big myth, which really Philip Hancock's case does address, that there are no atheists in foxholes, which has dogged us since the 1940s when somebody coined that erroneous phrase. And of course, we know so many atheists who, we all die, and some of them, cancer victims or in the military or whatever. How would you answer that when you hear that myth?
I would say there's truth in the fact that when we are faced with acute moments of crisis, we want to understand meaning. We want to understand the big picture because we feel small and we're scared. And so it's an easy jump to get to wanting to believe or wanting to pray in that moment when it seems like you are facing the worst moment you've ever faced before. People can get to that point without needing to believe in the supernatural.
Well, and I think many of our members have been offended by religious chaplains coming in and trying to pray to them, and that's the last thing they want when they don't believe.
And to be perfectly clear, in CPE, which is clinical pastoral education, which is our training, they say the same thing. So the Carmelite monks, the Catholics, the Nazarenes, and the Baptists, they're getting the same message of like, you are not there to save souls and to proselytize. That is not what spiritual care is.
Well, I have to say, when I've been in the hospital, I've thrown the chaplain out. I don't want some stranger I don't know trying to pray over me.
And her blood pressure would shoot straight up if a chaplain came in, and that's anti-therapeutic, isn't it? So you were raised Pentecostal. You may not know, I used to be an associate pastor at an Assembly of God church years ago. Did you ever speak in tongues and do faith healing and all that kind of thing?
I didn't personally, but I witnessed it. I witnessed it, and I tell you what, there's you can't take it back when you see your father do it for the first time.
Yeah.
Like, oh, didn't need to see that, but yeah, that was part of Sunday.
But then you saw the light. Well, thank you, Devin.
Yes, I think it was very wonderful that you were a support to Philip Hancock, and that's the kind of thing that is needed. And we really appreciate your sharing this very unusual story with us.
Yeah, happy to.
And thank you for watching Freethought Matters.
Because free thought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.